Hey everyone, this is Drew Creekmer, Wealth Advisor with Creekmer Wealth, and today I'm joined by Andy Anderson, who's a wealth advisor and the Director of Financial Planning at Creekmer Wealth. In this 5 Minute Finances, we are going to dive into an article that Andy wrote this month titled The Three Ways Which Planning to Fail for Retirement Will Lead to Some Major Risks. And so we've included that article in the body of the email that you can read if you haven't done so already. But we're just going to kind of walk through those three items and kind of give some more what Andy meant by those three biggest risks. And so first up, we have failing to prepare. Andy, I think we see this every day with people that we work with. A lot of times we are preparing to fail by not preparing for our future. And so can you kind of dive into that would look like in the real world?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of funny because, if you go to, if you're a mechanic, you're going to see people come into the store that have broken cars, right? So
Right.
you attract the people that need your help. So for us as wealth advisors, as financial planners, it's not uncommon that we get folks coming to us that have prepared to fail or failed to prepare for their retirement. And that's where we step in and we try to take them from where they are to where they want to be.
Right.
And as an example, so someone coming to us, they may have heard things over the course of their lives, something their friends are doing, something that a mentor is doing. Well, a lot of times it may not be based in sound logic or sound financial sense. Just as an example, something that we do here all the time is something called Roth conversion analysis. And what that is at its core is just trying to optimize someone's tax situation so that they end up with the most dollars at the end of time. You and I walk through this all the time with our clients. And just as an example, one of the main strategies that most people use, we're trying to coordinate investments. We're trying to coordinate Social Security. When do you claim Social Security? There's a lot of moving parts when it comes to a retirement plan. And the strategy that most people use, because it's the most easy to understand, is, well, let's just start Social Security as early as possible, at age 62. That way we have dollars coming to us when we need it. And we're just going to build up all of our dollars in our 401k, which is a pre-tax account. Well, that strategy, has it worked for people over the years? Yeah, absolutely. It's
Sure.
worked for people. But is it the best strategy we can use? I think you and I can both agree a lot of times it's not.
Right.
I was looking back at some of the previous cases we worked on just to see kind of how that analysis impacted folks and their plan overall. And I think the numbers are pretty staggering.
Right.
When we look at someone, I was looking at a client, 60 years old, looking towards retirement. When we run the numbers on kind of that conventional wisdom approach of taking Social Security at age 62 and spending down the pre-tax dollars, well, the projection shows that they would end their lives with about $600,000 in their investments. When we factor in those different strategies we can use to coordinate all aspects of that plan, we actually increase that $600,000 ending balance up to $1.7 million.
Wow,
So
that's huge.
yeah, that's a significant difference, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's a matter of a number of years where, if things happen, live a longer life, spend a little bit more, well, now you've built in some cushion there where you can really make up the difference.
Right. And, I think you hit on something, that's a great example. And the other thing you talked about was the example of a mechanic, right? I'm terrible with cars. You don't want me working on your car. I don't work on my own cars. I take that to a mechanic because they know a lot more about the inner workings of a car. Just like, John's used the example of a doctor before. You go to an expert. And so maybe these people aren't necessarily failing to prepare. They just maybe don't know or don't know have the resources that we have to coordinate everything,
Yeah,
right? And that's where we can really add a ton of value there for them.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a matter of if you don't have the time, if you don't have the desire, if you don't have the tools, well, you go to somebody that does that.
Right.
And we have the time to really look at this stuff all day, all week, and really come up with the best strategy.
Right. Right. Yeah. So that's a great example. So that's failing to prepare. Let's dive into number two, which is failing to save enough. And I think enough to a lot of people, that's kind of just, it's not really defined. It's out there. And I thought you wrote a really great article last month, actually, kind of talking about how to define what is enough. How much do you truly need in retirement? Can you kind of walk us through your thoughts on what you meant by saving enough?
Yeah, so it's interesting. A lot of times when I'm meeting with folks, I'll get a question, well, you see a lot of other clients. How do we compare to your other clients?
Right.
How are we doing compared to your other clients? And my answer is really, it doesn't matter. The other clients are irrelevant because their situation is different than yours. So if I were to ask you, Drew, and say, I've got $500,000, can I retire? Can I?
Yeah, maybe.
If I've
Maybe not.
got $1 million, can I retire?
Right.
It's the answer is we need more information.
Right.
We
Right.
need to know what those goals are.
Right.
If I'm saying, I want to retire at age 70 and I'm going to be spending $30,000 a year, well, you may not need to have $1 million in your portfolio when you
Mm.
retire because your spending needs are much lower. If, on the other hand, I'm saying, I want to be retired as young as possible. I want to retire at age 45. I want to travel the world and see all these different things. And I want to have a budget that I can spend and live comfortably on. Well, in that case, you may need much more than the first scenario we talked about.
Right.
So
Right.
having enough, it's different for every person. That's where we always try to approach it from a goals-based standpoint to say, what is your goal? And once we know what the goal is, then we can actually do the math, do the analysis to say, what's an actual number that represents enough for you as a specific person?
Right. Right. And when you get to the core of enough with people, and we're going to get a little bit granular here. How many people do you see actually understanding how much they need per month? It's surprisingly few, right? And so if you were giving someone a tip as to where to start, would you say, hey, track your spending on a monthly basis for an extended period of time? That is where you should start to start determining what enough may look like. Is that kind of where you would start at?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If we don't know what our lifestyle requires as far as a monthly cash flow, well, then it's very hard to determine what amount we need to get to. It's very hard to put a finish line on that number if we don't know what we're spending. And I say all the time, my goal is not to restrict your spending. My goal is to help you understand your spending and get you to a place where you can live out that life you want to. And part of that is just being aware, like you said, of tracking that money, where it's going every month.
Right. Knowledge is power. Knowing your numbers is power. And we've been able to see that with a lot of folks over the years. So, and let's say you define what enough is, you know how much money you need. A huge part of that is actually generating the returns to actually meet your lifestyle needs. And so your third item was, hey, failing to plan investments. And, I have some interesting numbers here. There's a 20-year time period that ended the end of 2019. So that 20-year time period, the S&P returned just north of 6% a year, which is a pretty solid return, a little bit lower than historical averages, but pretty good. But what was so fascinating to us was that the average investor returned about 4.25% over that same time period. And there are two main factors for that. One is behavioral, and the other is risk. Andy, let's kind of talk about that topic for these clients here.
Yeah, so risk is a big part of investing in general. Some folks may not have heard or may not have understood that there's this trade-off, there's this relationship between risk and return. If you keep your dollars in a savings account at the bank, well, that's a very safe account, right? You're not going to worry about the stock market decreasing the value of that account.
Right.
But because of that, your expected rate of return is much, much lower. When we are looking to increase a rate of return in a portfolio, really the only way to do that is by increasing the amount of risk we're taking in that portfolio. And what do I mean by risk? Risk is really the potential to increase or decrease in value and the magnitude of those decreases. So when we're coming up with an investment plan for a client, it's important for us to determine what is that client's personal risk tolerance. And what that means is how much risk are they able to take on while still being able to sleep at night?
Right.
That's the big determinant, right? Because, we may say, you are 35 years old, you don't want to retire until you're 65. So you have 30 years, you're able to be aggressive with your investments, from just a third party point of view. Well, if that client gets so stressed, their heart races when they see their account drop in value. They're waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Well, what's the likelihood that that client is going to stick out the drops in the market, that they're going to stay invested in those volatile times in order to try to keep up with the overall market?
Right.
The likelihood, I think, is very low. So that's how investors, the retail investors, that number you mentioned, underperforming the S&P 500 by about 2 percentage points per year, that's why that happens. It's because people are not familiar with the amount of risk they're taking, and they're making behavioral or emotional decisions when the account drops more than they're willing to see it drop.
Right. And wouldn't you say that it's really, it's honestly, it's not one-stop shop. Someone doesn't come in and see us and we know exactly what the risk should be that client should be taking. It takes some time and a fine-tuning of the plan to actually truly narrow in on what the right amount of risk is. We have a general idea, but everyone's different. And that's why when we build plans, they're customized to each individual, right? And each individual's needs. And we're kind of there's the emotional shield during those extreme periods of volatility. And so, when you see people come in with their investments for the first time, how often do you actually see risk being appropriately aligned with people's goals? Is it all the time, half the time? What would you say just off the cuff?
I think it's a crapshoot. I think a lot of the times, if it lines up, it's by accident. And if it doesn't line up, it's by accident. A lot of folks are not familiar with the amount of risk they're taking. So, we get some folks that come in and we'll actually present to them and say, this is the level of risk in your current portfolio. And a lot of times they're surprised and they say, wow, I didn't realize I was taking that much risk. I didn't realize I stood to lose that much if the market were to go south. So we see that a lot. And it's a matter of just being unaware of the amount of risk that's being taken in a portfolio.
Right. And really, you're unaware until you see something like March of 2020, right? Or 2008. And in between, you have years of, oh, you know what? It's fine. You're rewarded for taking more risk, and you're okay with that because you're not seeing those big losses. So that's where that relationship comes in to really helping people define that. So, Andy, we have had some really great items here that we've discussed. Any closing thoughts that you would just give to people on how they can better prepare themselves for a successful retirement?
Yeah, I would say, number one is just make sure that you're keeping track of your cash flow. The foundational piece of any successful plan is spend less than you earn. If you're spending less than you earn, you're avoiding that destructive debt that builds up and can really eat into your finances. And it gives you a platform from which you can start to allocate dollars to other goals. So that goes to the question of, do I have enough? Well, if you're not managing your cash flow every month, you probably will not end up with enough. And the next is just, be open to counsel. Work with someone that you trust, someone that can provide excellent advice, and make sure that you're willing to make the changes needed to reach those goals that you're so excited about.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that's great pieces. If you actually have any questions after watching this video or you want to reach out to us, there's a link in the body of this email where you can schedule a 15-minute conversation where we'll walk you through how this works in relation to your specific needs. And so hope you guys found this insightful. And if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks.